Okay, thank you everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit. I wish I had retitled my talk to Unintentional Journey to a Catch and Release Fishery. But I'm going to talk a little bit about this seemingly easy but extremely difficult question on how many dead discards is too many, and trying to put some information behind that. And this is work done by myself and Dan Portnoff, who's currently at Scripps. At Ocean Conservancy, I'm a fishery scientist at Ocean Conservancy. We support a healthy ocean, thriving planet forever and for everyone. And in our fish program, we support science-based solutions for sustainable fisheries. Global recreational marine catch is increasing. Last estimate was somewhere probably over 1 million tons at this point in time. In the United States, recreational fishing is a big deal. We'll go through the factoids. Recreational fishing has a $145 billion impact to the economy, which is slightly less, but not by much of the commercial fisheries. 100 billion fish caught in 24, I think, is the last factoid I caught across the U.S. 204 million angler trips nationally. 45 million of those occur off the west coast of Florida, which is where I'm from, right about here, facing the Gulf of Mexico. So huge volume of recreational fisheries. In this region where I'm from, the Gulf of Mexico, America, we're in a national conference, we'll say Mexico. There's a lot of recreational fishing, there's a lot of commercial fishing, and it leads to a lot of conflict and a desire for very precise management to maximize the amount of time recreational fishers can spend on the water and commercial fishermen can take home. And there's a lot of discarding, and so from the recreational point of view, we see quite a bit of out-of-season discarding. So our main fisheries law requires annual catch limits for every managed stock in the U.S. And so to accomplish this goal, we have to restrict seasons quite a bit with that many fishers. And I just pulled an example here. This is red snapper in the Gulf of Mexico, where you can see that the out-of-season discarding, this yellow line I've pointed here, actually contributes the majority of mortality to the stock. Each of these lines is a fleet modeled in the stock assessment, which is crazy on its own terms, and we could have a whole session about that. But they do it, and they're amazing. But what we find is this mortality is really driven by this out-of-season discarding. But management hasn't really turned the page to acknowledging that we should be managing discards here. And in a lot of cases, some data programs don't collect discards. Marcus here is working on the problem. Annual catch limits don't even consider dead discards. They only include, despite the name, only include landings. And this lack of information really increases uncertainty, limits management effectiveness, and erodes trust. And the problem is growing, so this is another example from great triggerfish in the region. You can see the progression over time towards a discard fishery. And the years aren't important here, but you can see as the seasons become more restrictive, the discards can increase. And just to add a flavor to the uncertainty in Matt's work, the discard survival range proposed for the stock and stock assessments over time has ranged from 7 to 100%. There's just a paper last week that came out modifying this. So quite a bit of uncertainty there. So we wanted to know as a conservation organization, how prevalent is this issue nationally across the country? And to do that, we combined 3 NOAA databases, all individually wonderful pieces of information. I thought it would be a quick merge. A few months later, we got it done. But information on stock status from the top one there, StockSmart, recreational catch from our National Marine Recreational Monitoring Program, and then commercial and economic data from this fisheries one-stop shop. All are great resources if you're ever looking at US fisheries. So what does the data show? Here is a breakdown of the discard rates by region. So I've just summed the amount of landings in dark blue and discards in light blue across each of the regions in the US, so not on a per stock basis. You can see the total magnitude on top and the proportional difference on the bottom. I think the take homes here is you can see the magnitude of recreational fishing in the southeast, this Gulf and South Atlantic region, to a lesser extent mid-Atlantic. And if we look on the bottom, we can see, roughly 2/3 of fish are being discarded in these East Coast regions that touch the East Coast of the United States, and some regional differences in the Pacific Coast and Pacific Islands and our other areas. These can be attributed to a lot of things, probably social, cultural pieces, but really I think this probably boils down to the intent of a fishing trip. It's really nice, beautiful to go out fishing in Florida. Catching a fish is a bonus. Whereas fishing day in Washington isn't quite so beautiful, so if you go out, you're going to take some fish home. We see a lot of subsistence fishing in the Pacific. And so, given these changes, what if we look on a stock-by-stock basis instead of the sums? Roughly the same story. On average, we're seeing for these East Coast regions about a 75% of the catch is discarded across the regions. Quite low in the Pacific Islands, except for Barracuda, which is that outlier there. They're all thrown back. And even in the Pacific Coast, quite a few stocks with high discard ratios. And so just like thought experiment, okay, to stay at average fisheries discarding 65%. If we assume 25% mortality, which might be a high assumption based on what I just saw, but for stocks like reef fish, which do experience quite a bit of barotrauma from death, and rockfish on the west coast, may be reasonable. But assume that, looking at that assumption as a thought experiment, you're looking at 25 keepers and about 19 dead discards. So we're already nearing the point where our dead discards that are outnumbering our directed landings. And you can break this down on a per stock basis. We haven't done this for everything. That's another database. Maybe I should have merged because maybe I'm not very good at it. But looking at gag grouper, you can see how catch flows through the system for this individual stock. This is stock assessment data, so there's a discard mortality estimate baked into here. But I think you can see first how the commercial and recreational catch breaks down. But what the real take home, if you follow these through, is the size of those dead discards and landings bar. We're really at the point where we're going over 50%. And we have to acknowledge the uncertainty in those discards estimates, the importance of those discard estimates, and how many fish might move from that red bin to that yellow bin. And I think these stock assessments maybe provide a sense of too much more certainty than we have. Okay, so there's a big magnitude issue going on here. How does that affect stock health, or does it affect stock health is really what it boils down to. Are these sustainable fisheries? To do that, we looked at the proportion of recreational catch for each individual stock that I pulled from these databases. Along the x-axis, the fishing mortality ratio, so the mortality rate over the target, sort of an overfishing indicator on the y. And then the size of, in this case, the landings, which is the size of the dot. And what we see is really that most of these stocks fall below this one ratio of 1. So most of the stocks are not really experiencing this overfishing. There are some outliers on the right-hand side in the Gulf of Mexico, South Atlantic, and Pacific Islands, and you do tend to see that those outliers do have a high proportion of recreational catch. Similar plot, same y-axis, shuffling around, looking at the proportion of discards of the recreational catch. We plot those along. Similar story, I think you see as the catch, the dots are catch in this plot, increases, you see the amount of discards increases. Still the mass of the stocks are below that one level, so not really a trend here. And it looks like we're dealing with like a manageable, a dozen or so subset where these outlying subset do have a very high proportion of discards and a high proportion of recreational fishing, but a manageable set. And so the question is, should we rethink the way we're managing these to bring these fishing mortality rates back down? And so what do we do about it? So a few ideas, just that, and these are conceptual and looking for feedback, and this is where the discussion starts. So one thing is we can start prioritizing these stocks using really simple, seemingly simple analyses like these. Maybe there's a danger zone here. Let's identify the criteria for these stocks and maybe have a conversation about what we need to do differently. And I've used the 50% break here. Like, is that meaningful? I don't know. But I think these risk assessment tools, and I've gotten a lot of ideas this week about other factors incorporated into proper risk assessment, could be useful to prioritize. We also need to acknowledge impacts to management. So there's kind of a management intervention conundrum that happens where we estimate our reference points on MSY, but those estimates are really conditional based on the fleets that are fishing the stock. We're never going to be able to achieve these theoretical biological maximums. They're dependent on these lower, and this plot here is a really nice paper if you're interested in this stuff. How much can we catch based on the current composition of the fleets? But when we need a management intervention, we need to intentionally change the selectivity of the stocks and the discard rates of the stocks. That's the goal. So we create these estimates, and we have this conundrum where we change everything, but we're not looking in advance about what those changes would be, even though we know what some of these relationships are. So this is where all the science, I think, this week comes into stock assessment and management choices. Being transparent about objectives is really important. So I could give a whole talk about the conflicts of red snapper in the Gulf of Mexico. But this is an interview recently from one of the managers in the region. And they're basically demonstrating that they want to extend they want smaller fish in their stock so they can have the longest season possible because these annual catch limits are managed in pounds. And so if you want bigger fish, you may have to look elsewhere, but our goal is a bigger season. And so this kind of transparency is great. Had it been done 8 years ago, it would have prevented a lot of conflict. And I think it's a lesson for managers to have this level of transparency on the front end. It's appreciated. And then there's some great multi-forecasting tools available. So this is a researcher at University of South Florida. He's looking at the multi-species forecasting tools, looking at predicting mortality across overlapping seasons, because we have these short seasons. So let's think in a multi-species context where we can place those short seasons to reduce discards on these co-occurring species across the entire plan. So just to wrap up, this is the first national look at discards since 2019. NOAA stopped reporting their bycatch reports back then. I think generally we have a lack of concerted effort to manage discards. Sometimes we prefer to ignore them, and this drives conflict. And I think for these key stocks, we should change that paradigm. Discard proportions are high, and that leads to these challenges we're all grappling with here in science and management. We didn't find a real relationship between the magnitude of wreck fishings and overfishings, but those clusters do have those components as well. And I think as always, these social and cultural differences are a real part of understanding the issue and resolving it and working with the communities. So that's all I got. I hope I didn't go over. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michael. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. I have maybe a question. I'm not a native speaker, but maybe, in the room, is there a difference between saying release and discard? Does it have any implications?
I think I'm using language from the stock assessment world, and I think it's just a language difference. But I think post-release mortality is the variable we're after here.
Okay. So it's not discard doesn't imply that everything is dead or dying. It's the same.
Yep.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. I picked up on that language difference.
I guess speaking from the stock assessment world, what were your thoughts on the quote from the manager suggesting that having smaller fish being what makes up the fishery being a target?
From a conservation point of view, I would like to see the age structure restored. But given the level of conflict in the fishery, sort of that transparency, I think, so we can work towards a solution is really what's needed there.
Thanks. Yeah, it might be a little bit from the side, and it might also apply to Matt's talk a little bit, but I was just thinking as you were talking, what about the issue of depredation? We're seeing this more and more in fisheries, West Australia, up in east coast of South Africa, losing huge amounts of fish, hooked fish to shark predation mainly, but seals and other animals. How do you build that in to this type of work? Because it's essentially another fish that gets caught, but it dies, kind of thing. So
yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. It's a major issue where we are, dolphins and sharks in the Gulf of Mexico region. In terms of estimating mortality for a stock assessment, it's got to be lumped in there, but I don't think we really have a good handle on that. And I can deflect you to others in the room that can maybe answer that better for the region.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.